Okay, so welcome to the third class, Wednesday class of this semester. And again, in this class, we're learning about the 4 establishments of mindfulness and practicing them as well. And I thought that the last 2 sessions I've given quite a bit of instructions. So this session today, I thought we could start with some meditation to try to practice what we've learned, have more chance to experiment with and put into practice what we've learned. And so we'll do the meditation on the breathing, using the breath as the focal object of our practice. And in the instructions given by the Buddha, we start off just observing the breath coming in and going out. We'll do that for a few moments. And then he goes on to talk about observing if the breaths are long or short, not trying to make them long or short, but just sometimes the body breathes in a longer way and sometimes in a shorter way. So just paying attention and trying to notice if the breath is long or short. Sometimes it will be long, sometimes it will be short. Although it's, then there's this question of, well, where's the dividing line between long and short? Buddha didn't explain that. So I think we just have to make our own determination of whether it's long or short. And I think paying attention to the breath being long or short helps to develop this factor of vigilance or introspective awareness, which I spoke about last week. And so this is the mental factor that is aware of what is happening in our body and mind, what our body is doing, what our mind is doing. And it's sometimes compared to a kind of guard or sentry, because if we do want to develop ourselves on the spiritual path, we need to be careful to avoid doing things that are unwise and unskillful and create more suffering for ourselves and others and take ourselves away from enlightenment and continue to be in samsara. So we want to make sure that what we do with our body and our mind and our speech as well is wise and skillful and will help us go towards enlightenment rather than more suffering. And so it's this mental factor. I'm calling it vigilance just because it's shorter and easier to say than introspective awareness. So that mental factor is what pays attention to and notices what is going on with our body and mind. So if we are paying attention to whether each breath is long or short, that helps to sharpen that mental factor of vigilance, cultivate it further. And then after doing that for a while, I thought we could add on the next part of the instructions given by the Buddha in the sutra. And so this is I'll read what the Buddha said. He said, he trains thus, meaning the practitioner trains thus, I shall breathe in, experiencing the whole body. He trains thus, I shall breathe out, experiencing the whole body. So what does it mean to experience the whole body? There's actually different interpretations. People who comment on the sutra, who wrote commentaries to the sutra, both in the past, but also nowadays, teachers and so on. So there's different interpretations. So one interpretation is that whole body refers to the whole body of the breath, the entirety of the breath, from the very beginning all the way through to the end. So you're really focusing very carefully on the entirety of each inhalation of breath and each exhalation of breath. So that's one interpretation. Another interpretation says that, no, wait a minute, we've already been doing that because in the second step of paying attention to whether the breath is long or short, we have to be paying attention to the entirety of the breath to know if it's long or short. And so they interpret whole body to mean literally the whole body, meaning that we expand our awareness. We don't stop watching the breath. We continue observing the breath coming in and going out. But we let our awareness expand further so that we're aware of the whole body and have this awareness of the breathing taking place within the entirety of the body. So Joseph Goldstein, in his book, he says both interpretations are valid, and we could use both of them at different times. He said, for example, there may be times when we are focusing too tightly on the breath. We're really concentrating on the breath and really, really tight in a kind of controlling way. There may be this attitude of controlling the breath that comes in, which I often hear people talk about. I don't have that experience, but some people say they can't watch the breath without controlling it. So maybe, yeah, some people just have that tendency to be controlling. So if we're too tight and too controlling with the breath, then he said, then it would be good to expand our awareness. Don't focus only exclusively on the breath, but let your awareness expand and be aware of the whole body. But on the other hand, there may be times when our awareness is just kind of spaced out. We're sort of lost in space, lost in thoughts, not able to really focus very well. And at those times, then it could be helpful to only focus on the breath, because that will make our mind more focused, more calm, less distracted. So he seems to say we could adjust, we could alternate. Sometimes focus only on the breath, think of whole body, meaning the whole body of the breath. Sometimes we could, take it literally and understand whole body to mean the entire body. Okay, so I'll introduce these different parts of the practice a little bit as we go along in the meditation, so you don't have to remember all the instructions right from the beginning. And also, I encourage you to try to have the qualities that we talked about so far. There are these 4 qualities that we need to try to have when we do this practice of the establishments of mindfulness. The first quality being ardency or enthusiasm, or maybe we could even say joyous effort, having a sense of joy and delight and enthusiasm about doing the practice rather than, I don't really want to do this, but I have to do it because my teacher is telling me to. So really try to feel that we're fortunate to have the opportunity to do this practice. It was something taught by the Buddha, and it's been practiced by followers of the Buddha for the last 2,500 years with wonderful results. They've even been able to achieve enlightenment and nirvana by doing this kind of practice. So we're really fortunate to have the chance to learn it and practice it, even if it's just taking a few baby steps in the practice. So try to have this sense of joy and enthusiasm for doing it. And the second quality that we looked at is vigilance or introspective awareness, which is just this aspect of the mind that's watching, paying attention to what is going on in our body and mind. And for example, knowing if our mind is on the breath or lost in space, thinking about other things. So if you do notice your mind has been distracted, thinking about something else other than the breath, then that's vigilance. It's vigilance or introspective awareness that notices that your mind has wandered away And then you can bring it back to the breath. And vigilance would also notice if maybe something's happening in our body, like if we're slouching or not really sitting in a good position for meditation. And then we can correct that problem as well. Okay, so let's begin the meditation. And as I say, I'll remind you of the instructions as we go along. So put yourself in a comfortable position for meditation. It's also important that our posture be a conducive one for meditation. That means trying to keep the back straight, but the shoulders relaxed, hands in the lap, and arms not pressed against the sides of the body, but a little bit away so the air can circulate and you don't get too hot. And eyes can be left open a little, looking down, so there's some light coming into the eyes. That helps us stay awake and alert. And it's also good to place the tip of the tongue on the roof of the mouth behind the upper teeth. That reduces the need to swallow, which can become a distraction during meditation. So let your body settle down and relax in this position. And remember the positive, altruistic motivation we generated earlier today. Having the wish to be of benefit to as many other people and beings as possible. Even the entire world, if you're comfortable thinking in that way. And wanting to develop your mind, develop the positive qualities, positive attributes of the mind, such as love, compassion, wisdom, so that you can be more beneficial to others in the world and less likely to do anything harmful or disturbing to others. So may this meditation help us towards that goal. And then focus your mind, your awareness on your breath. Just allowing the body to breathe in a natural way without controlling it. And you can find your own way of being aware of the breath, wherever you can feel it, can experience it most easily, most clearly. So that's the focal object, the meditation object, the breath. So we try to keep our focus, keep our awareness on the breath. And notice if the mind wanders away from the breath to some other object, like a thought, a memory, a sound. some sensation in the body. So when we notice our mind has wandered away from the breath, that's vigilance, introspective alertness that notices that. And so if that happens, when that happens, just bring your mind back to the breath. Again, it's mindfulness, mental factor of mindfulness that remembers the breath and doesn't allow the mind to forget, wander away. So when your mind is on the breath, remembering the breath, remembering to focus on the breath, that means mindfulness is present, it's functioning. So we try to have both mindfulness and introspective alertness present and functioning while we do the meditation. And in that way, we can keep the mind on the object, the breath, and bring the mind back to the object when it wanders away. And when your mind has gained some stability on the breath, you can also bring in the next step of the instructions, which is to notice when the breath is long and when it's short. Doesn't mean you have to get into a lot of conceptualization and labeling, but just to have this awareness of breathing in long, breathing out long, breathing in short, breathing out short. So this helps us to have stronger vigilance or introspective awareness. And then, if and when you feel ready to do so, you can incorporate the next part of the instructions, which is to be aware of the whole body. And so that means you continue being aware of the breath flowing in and out, but your awareness expands so that you're aware of the breath taking place within a whole body. It doesn't mean you let your mind go running around your body and paying attention to different parts of your body. Just have this awareness of the whole body within which the breath is flowing in and out. But if you find that doing that causes your mind to be distracted, your concentration to be unstable, then you can go back to just focusing on the breath, and you can think of whole body referring to the whole body of the breath, the entirety of the breath. Really paying close and careful attention to each breath, starting with the initial part of the breath and all the way through to the end, and then out again. So you can choose which of those ways of thinking or interpreting the meaning of whole body to find which way works better for you. Some people might be wondering, well, if there's all these different steps to the practice, how do you know when to move from one step to the next? And my guess is that if you were really seriously doing this kind of practice, you might be living in a meditation center or maybe in a monastery in Thailand or Burma and spending many hours each day working on these practices. And there's most probably one or more teacher there with whom you could get have conversations about your practice and get personal advice, personal instructions, and you'd give feedback to your teacher would give you advice, and so the teacher would be guiding you along the way. And so if you're, a raw beginner, you'd be starting with just the very first step, and you might spend quite a while on that step before going on to the next one. So for those of us who don't have that opportunity to live in such a situation and have personal instructions, personal guidance from an experienced teacher, it's a little tricky. I think it's good to know more of the instructions, even if we're not ready to practice all of them, because then that will give us a bigger picture of where we're going in the practice and what's the purpose of the practice, what we should be doing, and so on. But then being our own guide in the sense of getting to know ourselves and what's helpful for us and what isn't helpful. So if we notice that trying to do too many things, take on too many different aspects of the practice at once just makes us feel scattered and disturbed, then it might be better to go back to just the beginning steps and spend more time working on that, and then gradually adding on the others. That's my guess. But then, not having had that experience myself of being in Theravada monastery or meditation center and having that kind of personal guidance, then it's just a guess how it works. But also listening to Joseph Goldstein in his talks, the talks which were the basis of the book on mindfulness, he did have that opportunity of spending a lot of time in places like India and Burma and doing many hours of meditation every day with a teacher that he could go back to and get guidance from. So very fortunate if we have the chance to do that. Otherwise, we have to be our own guide and keep going back to the teachings of the Buddha to get help with further steps. So I'd like to now talk about the third of the 4 qualities we started talking about earlier. These are in your book, starting on the bottom of page 41. So we looked at the first of the 2 qualities, the first 2 of the 4 qualities. The first one being ardency or enthusiasm, and the second one being, it's called their clear comprehension, and clear comprehension is just another translation of the term for mindfulness, for introspective alertness and vigilance. So I spoke about that last time. So now I'd like to talk about the third of the 4 qualities, and this is mindfulness. So you can find that on the top of page 42 in your book. So mindfulness is a very, very important quality, we could say. It's actually a mental factor. But in all Buddhist traditions, you see the importance of mindfulness being stressed. And I've often found it a little frustrating because the term mindfulness can seem to have many different meanings, and that is the case. It does have different meanings in different contexts. So we just have to have an expansive mind and not be too focused on there's just one meaning of mindfulness all the time, but understand that it does have different meanings. So Joseph Goldstein himself mentions a few different meanings or uses of the term mindfulness. So the first one he mentions is present moment awareness. And this is probably in contemporary use. Mindfulness has become very popular, and lots of books and even apps on the practice of mindfulness. And so in that context, the way the term mindfulness is being used nowadays, it's probably this one, this meaning of being in the present, aware of what's happening moment by moment. On the other hand, that meaning of mindfulness, paying attention to what's happening each moment, sounds more like vigilance, introspective awareness, because that's the job of that particular mental factor, paying attention to what's happening in our mind and what our body is doing and so on. So what I wonder is if those two mental factors, which are actually different, mindfulness and vigilance or introspective alertness, they have just gotten kind of blended together into one in popular usage. Or maybe when teaching the practice to a large group of people who are not necessarily scholars, and maybe it would be difficult for them to really, tease out the difference between these two mental factors. They just got lumped together into one. Possibly, I don't know. And in the teachings on how to develop calm abiding in the Tibetan tradition, there's these very detailed instructions on how to develop calm abiding or serenity, single-pointed concentration. So in those instructions, mindfulness and vigilance are definitely explained separately. So in the teachings on how to develop calm abiding, mindfulness and vigilance are explained separately. And in that context, mindfulness is what remembers the object. So it's able to keep our mind on our object, like the breath or whatever we're meditating on. And then vigilance is this other mental factor that's a bit like a spy or a sentry that's kind of watching what the mind is doing and what the body is doing, and looking out for mistakes or faults, such as distraction or sleepiness, sinking, mental dullness, and then correcting those faults. So they do have different jobs to do in the practice of developing calm abiding. And even here in Joseph Goldstein's book, he says that a more accurate term for this present moment awareness, just paying attention to what's happening in the moment, is bare attention. So that's another term that's often used in Buddhist meditation circles, bare attention. That's when we're simply aware of what's happening in the moment without interfering with it. And he gives the example of when we're listening to music. If you're a classical music fan and you're listening to some piece of classical music, you just pay attention to the music itself, moment by moment. You're not thinking about what's coming next or what just happened, but you're just paying attention to the music playing at that moment. So that's an analogy for this present moment awareness. And I was thinking too, in your work as therapists, this is what you're doing with your patients. When you're having a session with your patients and they're talking, you're paying attention to what they're saying, as well as other, the tone of voice and facial gestures, body language. So you're paying very careful attention moment by moment to what your patients are doing and saying, and without a judgmental attitude, but just tuning in and being present. So that's one usage of the term mindfulness. Just being aware of what's happening in the moment. And then another use of the term mindfulness is, this is mentioned by Joseph Goldstein, wholesome recollection of, for example, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, ethics, and so on. So here he's talking about a kind of practice that was taught by the Buddha. The full practice is known as the 6 recollections. And recollection is another term, another English translation for the same word of sati, mindfulness. And so in this practice, you contemplate, for example, good qualities of the Buddha. So the first of the 6 recollections is of the Buddha. So recollecting the Buddha or mindfulness of the Buddha means you're thinking about the Buddha's good qualities, what the Buddha has done, good qualities he's attained, and so on and so forth. And this has a very beneficial effect on the mind. It makes your mind kind of calm, peaceful, joyful, and also more pure. Buddha himself said doing this kind of practice purifies the faults, the defilements of the mind. And it can generate a lot of faith and enthusiasm to follow the Buddha's teachings, practice what the Buddha taught. So that's another use of this term mindfulness, being mindful of those objects, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and so on. Another use of mindfulness, the term mindfulness, is in the context of 5 spiritual faculties, or powers, they're sometimes called as well. And these are 5 qualities we need to have as part of our practice in order for our practice to go well and bring about liberation, enlightenment, and so on. And so these 5 spiritual faculties are faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom. So later we can go into each of these and what they mean and how to develop them as well. But Joseph Goldstein said that mindfulness in the context of these 5 faculties has the ability to balance these faculties. They need to be balanced, and it's possible they could become imbalanced. We might have too much of one and not enough of another. So as an example, he said one of the faculties is faith. And if we have too much faith, that can sometimes cause us to become dogmatic and maybe narrow-minded, focused on our views and hostile to other people's views. And so that means we have too much faith and not enough wisdom. So mindfulness can help us notice that and become aware, oh, I've got too much of this and not enough of that. And so then we can balance that out by increasing our wisdom. Just my own thoughts about that would be to just think, well, it's not realistic to expect everybody to agree with me and hold the same views that I have. There's lots of other good views out there that people hold, and so I need to have respect for the views of other people and respect their right to hold their own views and not expect them to hold mine. So by cultivating more wisdom and skillful, means in terms of dealing with others, we can keep faith and wisdom in balance. And another example he gave was effort and concentration, 2 of the other spiritual faculties. Those need to be balanced because he said if we have too much effort and not enough concentration, that can cause us to be kind of restless and agitated. We're really enthusiastic about practicing, but our concentration isn't so good. So we become aware of that, then that can help us to, cool down our effort and increase our concentration. Or the other way would be having too much concentration and not enough effort. That can lead to sloth and torpor. So we might have very good concentration, but our effort or energy is lacking. It's become kind of slack, and so then our mind can get a bit dull and heavy and not have this sharp, clear vividness we need. So this is, I think, probably talking about very subtle things that can occur in your practice. If you're practicing many hours a day, you need to keep all these different factors in balanced. And mindfulness is something that enables you to do that, because mindfulness enables you to recognize what's going on and keep them in balance. But again, that sounds more like vigilance or introspective awareness that notices, oh, I got too much of this, and it's causing me to go in a not very good direction. So yeah, sometimes the way mindfulness is explained, it's hard to really see the difference between that and vigilance or introspective alertness. And then he mentions one last use of the term mindfulness, and that is guarding the sense doors. So this is also what we have in the Tibetan tradition. The teachings on the Lamrim, the path to enlightenment, we're told we need to guard our sense doors. And what that means is paying attention to what our senses are experiencing, what we are seeing and hearing and smelling, tasting, and also bodily sensations. Because if we're not careful, then our mind can get caught up in afflictive emotions, like we were talking about on Monday, the Monday class, about how if we contact a pleasant object, we see something pleasant or taste some delicious food or hear some beautiful sound. So when we have a pleasant experience, there's the danger that that can lead to attachment. Our mind can get caught up in attachment towards that. On the other hand, when we have an unpleasant sensory experience, we see something unpleasant or hear an unpleasant sound or an unpleasant odor or whatever, then that can lead to aversion and possibly even further than that into anger, and our mind can get all afflicted with hostility, doing something harmful. So mindfulness pays attention to what is happening in each moment, and noticing if there is this danger of getting carried away with an afflictive emotion, and then stopping that from happening. But again, that description sounds more like vigilance, introspective alertness. So what I think is the way that the two work together, mindfulness and vigilance, is that mindfulness is keeping our mind on some object, such as the breath, or what our body is doing, or whether we're meditating or we're in our daily life. Mindfulness is keeping our mind focused. And then it's actually vigilance or introspective alertness that has the wisdom. That's the smart one. That's able to notice if there's something happening that could be dangerous, like some afflictive emotion arising, and is able to stop the mind from getting carried away by that, going in that direction. So it's able to notice what's wholesome and unwholesome, what's beneficial and not beneficial. And then in our tradition, the Tibetan tradition, the term mindfulness is also used with regard to commitments or responsibilities that we have made. For example, those of us who are nuns and monks, monastics, we take vows or precepts. And lay people also can take vows when they take refuge and choose to follow the Buddhist path. They can take a certain number of vows, such as not killing, not stealing, and so forth. So if you have taken any of these vows or precepts, you need to remember that you took them and not forget. That would be disaster. One day you take a vow and the next day you forgot and you go and break the vow. So they talk about mindfulness in keeping in mind and not forgetting what vows we have taken, what precepts we have taken, what commitments we have made, so that we keep them and don't break them and don't go down the wrong track. And this is similar to what happens with ordinary people. Like parents, they have children and they're supposed to pick up their child from school at 3 o'clock. So they have to remember that, otherwise the poor kid's sitting there waiting, wondering where mommy is. Or with you and your patients, if you have an appointment to meet your patient at a certain time in a certain place, you need to be mindful of that and not forget. Otherwise, it can cause a lot of distress to the patient. So in that sense, then, mindfulness is the opposite of forgetfulness. Being forgetful, absent-minded, spaced out, or mindless. We actually have this expression in English of being mindless, which is when you're just kind of acting on automatic and not really aware of what you're doing. So mindfulness then enables us to stay on track with what we're supposed to be doing, making sure we do those things, and also what we're not supposed to be doing, making sure we don't do those things. So both in ordinary daily life as well as in Dharma practice, spiritual practice, mindfulness is very important. So, yeah, I wanted to just share something from His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And just talking about his own experience with mindfulness and introspective awareness, or vigilance, also called. So he says, mindfulness and introspective awareness practiced together naturally leads to a calmer and more focused mind. In my own experience, mindfulness of my precepts, which restrains me from involvement with physical and verbal actions, increases mindfulness of my behavior in general. So remembering that he's taken vows, precepts, helps him to be more mindful in general of his behavior. This spurs me to examine what is happening in my mind. As a result, distraction decreases and the mind is drawn inward toward a calm, one-pointed state, even when I'm not actively engaged in cultivating serenity or calm abiding. When anger arises in a well-trained mind, introspective awareness notes anger has arisen. We become mindful of the sensations anger arouses in the body and the mood in the mind. When we experience anger, it sometimes seems as though our entire self has turned into the nature of anger. Observing the anger as it manifests in the mind, instead of fixating on the story that sparked it, immediately helps dissolve the anger. So if we just say to ourselves, there's anger in my mind, or anger has arisen in my mind, that can really help to manage it, rather than our whole being just getting totally caught up, consumed in the anger, and our mind carried away with a story, why we're angry, and so on. Alternatively, introspective awareness identifies the anger, and mindfulness remembers karma and its effects. We experience disturbing situations as a result of the actions we have engaged in, so being angry at another person is misplaced. Or we are mindful of the instructions for the taking and giving meditation, Tonglen meditation, and focus on imagining taking on others' anger and its effects, and giving them our body, wealth, and merit to bring them happiness. So those are just some examples of how mindfulness and introspective alertness can function and operate, both not just in our meditation practice, but also in our daily life. So when they're present and functioning, then we're able to notice the arisal of negative states of mind like anger or attachment or jealousy or pride or guilt, beating ourselves up or whatever. So we recognize what's happening in our mind. And then one meaning of mindfulness is remembering practices we have learned for dealing with those mental afflictions so that we can manage them, maybe even transform our mind into something more positive rather than just getting totally caught up in that negative state of mind. Okay, so I hope that is helpful. And next week, I'll explain the fourth of the four qualities. And then we'll look at other aspects of the practice of mindfulness with breathing, which again is part of mindfulness of the body. That's the first of the four establishments of mindfulness of the body. So it starts with the breathing and then can move on to other aspects of awareness of our body. So let's just quickly, we have a few minutes left. In your book, on page 42, there's some excerpts from a book by Thich Nhat Hanh on mindfulness of breathing. And he goes through these four phases. We've already looked at the first three of the phases, which are just being aware of the breath, and then being aware if the breath is long or short, and then the full body, the entire body, either of the breath or the body itself. And the fourth phase, which we can practice next week, is calming the breath, body, and mind. So the Buddha said, breathing in, I calm the activities of my body. Breathing out, I calm the activities of my body. And Thich Nhat Hanh says this exercise, which is a continuation of the third, uses the breath to realize peace and calm in our whole body, for the functions of our body to be smooth and peaceful. So I think this is something that just happens naturally. We don't have to make our body calm, but if we're doing this practice, really paying attention to the breath coming in and going out, it does have a natural calming effect on our body and on our mind, our thoughts, our emotions, and so on. So we'll experiment with that next week. Okay, so let's complete this class by making a mental dedication of the merit, the positive energy we have created by coming together and doing meditation and learning and doing all this with a good motivation, an altruistic motivation to benefit all beings. So remember that motivation, and now let's share the positive energy that we've created with all living beings. May it bring peace, happiness, relief of suffering and the causes of suffering, and may it be helpful for all living beings to get in touch with their real nature so that they can awaken their potential for enlightenment. Okay, thank you.